Climate change is on track to cost the global economy $38 trillion a year in damages within the next 25 years, researchers warned on Wednesday. A baseline that underscores the mounting economic costs of climate change and continued inaction as nations bicker over who will pick up the tab. Cost is a major sticking point when it comes to concrete action on climate change, and money has become a key lever in making climate a culture war issue. The costs and logistics involved in transitioning towards a greener, more sustainable economy and moving to net zero are immense, and there are significant vested interests such as the fossil fuel industry, which is keen to retain as much of the profitable status quo for as long as possible. The researchers acknowledged the sizable costs of adapting to climate change but said inaction comes with a cost as well. The damages estimated already dwarf the costs associated with the money needed to keep climate change in line with the limits set out in the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement, the researchers said, referencing the globally agreed upon goalposts set to minimize damage and slash emissions. The $38 trillion estimate for damages is already 6 times the $6 trillion thought needed to meet that threshold, the researchers said. We find damages almost everywhere, but countries in the tropics will suffer the most because they are already warmer, said study author Anders Levermann. The researcher, also of the Potsdam Institute, explained there is a considerable inequity of climate impacts around the world, and that further temperature increases will therefore be most harmful in tropical countries. The countries least responsible for climate change are expected to suffer greater losses, Levermann added, and they are also the ones with the least resources to adapt to its impacts. The fundamental inequality over who is impacted most by climate change and who has benefited most from the polluting practices responsible for the climate crisis, who also have more resources to mitigate future damages, has become one of the most difficult political sticking points when it comes to negotiating global action to reduce emissions. Less affluent countries bearing the brunt of climate change argue wealthy nations like the US and Western Europe have already reaped the benefits from fossil fuels and should pay more to cover the losses and damages poorer countries face, as well as to help them with the costs of adapting to greener sources of energy. Other countries, notably big polluters India and China, stymie negotiations by arguing they should have longer to wean themselves off of fossil fuels, as their emissions actually pale in comparison to those of more developed countries when considered in historical context and on a per capita basis. Climate financing is expected to be key to upcoming negotiations at the United Nations' next climate summit in November.